Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality podcast, is brought to you by eMenu Choice Point of Sale and Clark Pro. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Arron Fish. My goal for this podcast: educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By bringing the resident and customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Today on Tips from Trestle, I'm chatting with Dr. Karen Schuder. Karen is an esteemed expert in resilience and anxiety reduction with advanced degrees in leadership and management. She emphasizes self-differentiation, mindfulness, and maintaining a non-anxious presence to enhance emotional and organizational health. Karen's strategies help individuals and teams navigate emotional complexities, fostering healthier interactions and sustainable caring practices. The workshops she leads and her book, Resilient and Sustainable Caring, empower people to lead purpose-driven lives grounded in core values and virtues. Karen, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Hey, Arron. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks to everybody who's listening.
Yeah, very excited to talk to you. I think, just thinking about the past few years and everything that's gone on, up and down, people definitely need this kind of guidance and in their lives and in their work lives. But I'm curious I want to start with, how did you get into this work with leaders around resilience and anxiety reduction?
Well, it's been going on for decades while I've been in different leadership positions and in helping roles, personal and professional. I'm trying to figure out how to make it easier because it's hard. It's hard helping people. It's hard working with people and working in organizations. And it came when I was finishing up my doctoral research on ethics and professional development. I learned about um, the anxiety and problems like burnout and compassion fatigue affecting veterinarians. And that has really applied to multiple fields. So I got into figuring out how do you counter burnout and how to counter compassion fatigue to make helping roles more sustainable.
And as you've done that, I know, like, in your book and with the work you've done and some of the conversations we've had, you've got some concepts that you highlight and talk about that I think our listeners can really learn from. And so I'd like to dive into some of those. And the first one that really caught my attention was this concept you have of anxiety as a contagion. And I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about how anxiety can spread within groups and around the negativity, and how leaders can kind of mitigate its impact.
Right. So one of the most prominent theories that I use is called family systems theory. It looks at system behaviors or the connections between people in group. The fact that anxiety spreads very quickly, that actually comes from our survival instincts. And so, when we're stressed, if there's maybe a lion going to chase us, right? Our body's going to respond in a way that is going to help us hopefully escape from that lion. But anxiety is our response to a real or perceived threat. And so if I'm afraid, for example, Aaron, that you're going to yell at me while we're doing this podcast, that threat to me, it creates the same physiological response. That's anxiety. And the problem is our world is in a state of high anxiety in so many different ways, and that's
Yeah.
not going away anytime soon. And a lot of professions, a lot of organizations, businesses are in just an escalating state of anxiety. And that won't change until there's enough of us who actually intentionally try to decrease anxiety. And so that survival instinct, anxiety, it spreads very quickly throughout groups until we actually make the intentional move to not absorb it and not increase it, which is very hard to do.
Yeah, you talk about like high stress situations, and I immediately go to what I do for a living, which is food service in the kitchen during a meal service, right? There is a lot happening, a lot of moving parts, and you know, there can be short commands and barking of orders, and sometimes it's not intentionally meant in a negative way, but it can definitely create that environment. And so, for those leaders that are listening, what are some things that they can do to try and mitigate that some?
Well, one of the things that can really help decrease anxiety in a group is to focus on the purpose and the purpose of the group rather than all the pressures coming at them and when there's a lack of resources per se, but to also include focusing really on the pressure, the purpose of that group.
Mhm.
Why are you together? Why are you working? And to be able to talk about how to communicate with each other, perhaps, to know how we want, ideally, ourselves to respond. Leaders, it is very important. A lot of leadership programs focus on how do we influence other people's,
Mhm. Yeah.
and there's value in that. But from the stuff that I'm teaching in my perspective and experience, and theoretically, we gain a whole lot as leaders by focusing more on how we position ourselves. And so a big part of that is knowing what is really important to us, knowing our values, knowing the virtues that are important to us, knowing exactly how we want to be radiating ourselves or, bringing ourselves into the world and being able to do that even in high pressure situations.
Well, one of the other concepts that you mentioned and you work through is emotional triangles and dysfunction. And so I think about all the individual personalities in the kitchen. I mean, you've got people from so many diverse different backgrounds and educational levels. And so there's just I guess, a boiling pot potentially of chaos and dysfunction in those operations. And so, what do you mean by emotional triangles, and how does that impact that overall team success?
So, one of the things we fail to often realize is that we are not victims to the anxiety around us. And how we respond to anxiety will either increase or decrease the anxiety in any group and the negativity, because anxiety and negativity are often partners. They travel together really quickly, right?
Mhm.
So, emotional triangles is probably one of the biggest culprits in spreading anxiety through a group in unhealthy ways. And an emotional triangle is simply this, where there's three individuals involved. And so, let's say, Aaron, I am really, really frustrated with our manager, Patty. And this is just a fictional name I've come up
Right.
with. There's no one behind this, right?
We like Patty, but still.
Yeah, we do, we do. But so let's say I'm frustrated with Patty. And rather than go and talk to Patty, because there's a whole lot of reasons why I might not feel comfortable doing that, I instead go to talk to you
Mhm.
because I feel comfortable with you. You're my colleague, you're my friend. I trust you in that. Well, what happens there? That influences your connection then to Patty. You might be concerned about this too, right?
Yeah.
And so you thinking because maybe you care about me or whatever, you take on my anxiety too. And so then you talk to Robert. Again, another fictional name, but it's this kind of behavior that these are emotional triangles and they will rapidly increase unless we stop participating in them. And the more triangles there are in any organization or group, including families, the more dysfunction there is. And so, one of the ways we can stop participating in those triangles is to go talk to the person we might be frustrated, for example. Or sometimes it's not even frustration, but sometimes it's concern. But go talk directly to that person. Or if we need support or objectivity, to not talk with someone in the group, but a trusted friend who is outside of the organization who can share perspective, that can give us some perspective on that. If, for example, for you, my coming to you, you could have helped me have a different perspective, perhaps,
Mhm.
or encouraged me to go talk to Patty. And the other thing is that when we are put into these triangle positions, we can differentiate ourselves. The more we are self differentiated from others, we can identify the difference between our own emotions and other people's emotions. And so, with a higher self differentiation, you could say, well, you know, I'm not going to, and this is, internally understand that you don't need to take on my anxiety and that
Yeah.
you can base your opinion, your thoughts with Patty on your own perceptions rather than my perceptions and beliefs.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that can get intertangled, and the more of those that get layered on top with the team, the conflict and dysfunction can almost spiral out of control. And so,
Yeah.
one aspect that I've always found is really helpful as a team, is building those connections with the people you're working with. And so, let me frame it this way: what kind of strategies can leaders use for themselves or even with their teams to try and stay connected with everyone without those emotional triangles being formed and begin to stack on top of each other?
Technology continues to drive changes in senior care, and that includes food service. eMenu Choice is an award-winning point-of-service application for managing the dining function in senior living communities. This mobile, touchscreen-enabled software enhances the dining experience for residents while streamlining processes for staff. The flexibility and functionality of eMenu Choice makes it an effective solution for any type of senior living environment, from independent and assisted living to skilled nursing facilities. It works for production kitchens or restaurant-style service with options for per meal or a la carte pricing, and accommodates a variety of payments, including bill to account, meal credits, and credit cards. Created by a senior care provider with more than a century of experience serving older adults, eMenu Choice eliminates communication barriers between staff and residents while enabling person-centered choices and greater resident satisfaction. eMenu Choice, transforming dining for senior living.
Yeah. Very important question because it's hard to do. The I think the most important thing that we can do as a leader is to know, like I mentioned, what is really important to us. What is our purpose? What is our values? What are the important virtues? And then clearly know how we can position ourselves and handle conflict and anxious situations that really radiates our integrity. But we can do simple things in our own lives to be able to decrease anxiety, to increase inner calm,
Mm,
breathing strategies, mindfulness, exercise, all of these different things that help us to promote inner calm will help us to be a less anxious presence in the groups that we are a part of. The other thing is if we understand the movement of anxiety and how there's typical patterns of behavior,
mm.
and when we can start to see those, then then it doesn't seem as personal and we are able to handle situations more calmly.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there that kind of perked my ear. You talked about like figuring out how to position yourself, and that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about self positioning because you had mentioned, typical leadership is around influence in others, right? This is how we're typically been trained, it's how leadership concepts have been developed. But you talk a little bit more about focusing on that self positioning rather than influencing. And so How does that help leaders better manage anxiety within themselves or within the team?
Yeah. So this concept and idea of self-differentiating and in uh, in its purest, it's being able to define our goals, our purpose, our values on our own. It's, I mean, we are influenced by other people, but it's being able to kind of weave through those influences to know exactly what you as an individual find really important. So being able to operate more from that place
Mm.
rather than I'm worried about how you think about me, or I want you to like me, and I want to make sure I can fix every problem that you have so that you will accept me. For example, it's much more sustainable and productive and effective to be able to operate from this place of purpose and values and this self differentiation rather than constantly being caught up by what we think other people are thinking about us or how we respond to the pressures coming at us to wanting us to be certain ways.
You mentioned values. That's something that I think I had to learn the hard way. When I first got into leadership, I was very much like, these are the concepts and the theories and the things that I need to do for those to influence my team to do the things. And what I found was I got results that way, but I didn't always get the best results or didn't always get done as fast. But looking at like the values that your team needs to have or the values that you have and kind of the purpose, that's part of what we initially talked about. And you kind of mentioned in your book as well. How does that values driven focus for a leader impact all of the functions that go with everyday leadership of a team?
It really decreases the anxiety. And because there are all these pressures that are coming at us, and a lot of them are focused or they trigger in us the need to be connected with others and how we are connected with others. And that's an important need. And I would never say we have to deny that need, but it's simply being able to function in a leadership position, in even in personal positions, to be able to function as ourselves based on what's really important. Because when we function more with concern on what other people think, how other people want us to be, then we give up pieces of ourselves. And so not only do we start bending our own ethics and morals, but it is really exhausting trying to respond to all of these different pressures. When we function, when we know really well what is really important to us and we can function from that place,
Mhm.
we can think more rationally, we can be more creative, we can engage in more authentic relationships, and we can be more team focused in regards to purpose. The pressures are still coming at us, but we feel them differently. Our decisions are more based on what's important rather than all of these pressures.
You mentioned authenticity, and I know that that's something that I've had to work on developing over time. But once I got to that, the levels of engagement from my team, the outcomes from the team were so much better. And like you said, the pressures, I definitely experienced that. you know, it wasn't just me as the leader feeling it. It was the team felt it, but we were also able to, hey, this isn't just my problem or just your problem.
Yeah.
We're solving this together. Like, let's work together and figure out how to kind of us against the world a little bit, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I was talking about at the beginning is identifying the movement of anxiety
Yeah.
being a social concept. It is not just an isolated challenge that we experience. And the reality is, anxiety to a certain degree is a good thing because it gets us to perform at higher levels and it pushes us to change because a lot of us really don't want to change unless
Mhm.
there's some reason to have to do so, right? It's
Yeah.
a truth for organizations and teams as well. So a little bit of anxiety is not a bad thing. But again, if we can understand that it's a social concept, we can I think we can handle it better and look at it in a different way.
I just love how you frame it. Like, you're going to have to deal with it in one way, shape, or form. Why not do it the right way and do it in a way that makes everybody feel less stressed about it, I guess. So, to oversimplify it, I think. But so your book, I know that you had been working on it, Resilient and Sustainable Caring.
Yep.
There it is on the screen. Um, Tell me a little bit about it. Did you build it as like a handbook for this? Is it more of a deep dive into all the concepts? Like, kind of talk to us a little bit about what a reader would get out of reading it and where they might even be able to find it.
Yeah, the book is just packed full of strategies. I have interviewed more than 50 individuals in helping roles, personal and professional, around the world. It's one of the cool things to really discover, to experience, is that people all over the world are experiencing the same challenges of burnout, compassion fatigue, anxiety overload, and it's cross professional. I've talked with healthcare providers, first responders, educators, you name it. And a lot of those things are just crossing these fields. So it includes their little pieces of their stories, but also concepts and, more importantly, strategies to be able to handle different challenges, to be able to promote a healthier way of living, to find healthy balance in life. It is really, the concept is comes from my work with family medicine residents and a wellness program I did with them.
Mhm.
They did not want a deep dive into any one particular subject. They wanted a basic introduction and they wanted strategies to be able to deal with the challenges because a lot of busy people they just don't have the time or mental energy to do a deep dive. And so dealing with things like promoting healthy boundaries, our best balanced self, fostering self compassion, dealing with conflict, decreasing anxiety, recovering from loss. But I provide strategies to help us individually, but I also bring in a collective perspective. So, how can I help my team deal with a loss? Or how can I help others deal with conflict without taking on their conflict?
Yeah, I those are the best kinds of books where you can know where you read it, but then you can kind of go back and use it almost as a guide or like a manual almost, if you will, of how can listeners learn more about the work you do, your workshops, and how can they find a copy of your book?
Yeah, you can find more information about what I'm doing on KarenSchuder.com. That's my website. I'm also on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Just put it using my name. My book is available, and it's available also in Spanish on online providers, including Barnes& and Noble and Amazon.
Perfect. Well, Karen, a great conversation. I know the listeners are going to get a ton out of this, and hopefully they go and grab a copy of the book to add to their listening. So thanks again for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Thank you. And thank you. Everybody listens to this. I hope you have a peaceful day.
So there it is, everybody. Another one in the books. Thanks again for tuning in. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestle. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.